the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. I've been having a good play with this camera over the last few months, trying to get used to it and learn the way of operating it compared to your normal standard mirrorless or DSLR cameras. It's a very different beast. It's a cinema camera, something that if you're looking and watching this video, then you know exactly what it can do. I'm not really here to talk about the camera per se, but more my rig and also the lenses that I've gone for. I've recently obtained these lenses over the last few weeks, and I've tried to go for focal lengths that I think I would like to have or use or need in the bag without breaking the bank. 3 of these are used. 1 of them was very cheap, so in fact 4 of them were all very cheap in my eyes. And there's only one that was kind of the one that everyone was saying I should get, and I've had experience using it with the GH5, and that's of course the Sigma 18-35 Art lens. So I'm going to be using the camera on a gimbal, on a tripod. It needs to be able to move around quite quickly. I didn't want to rig it out massive. I want to be able to move, change batteries, change a lot of it as quickly as I can, but also have the option that when I stick it on a tripod or change the setup in some way, then I'd be ready to go. I tried to get it to work with the Weeble Lab gimbal. It's a bit too much. As soon as you add the cage and the SSD drive to it, you're unfortunately stuck with you having to go for a bigger gimbal. Now I use the Weeble Lab on the GH5, but I generally use that for weddings and a little bit of commercial work, and it's something that when I'm going into doing a much bigger commercial job or short film work that I'm planning to do, then I would like to use this, and obviously the Weeble Lab is not good enough. I've ordered a Crane 3 Lab, and that'll be coming in the next few weeks, and that's something that once I've got used to it I'll do a little update video on. But for now I can tell you exactly what I've gone for with the actual Blackmagic itself. So as you can see straight away by the branding, we have the tilter cage. I actually ordered the full cage because I wasn't sure if I wanted the half cage or the full cage, and as it turns out you can have both. Once you have the full cage, which was the cheaper option to go for, you can use it as the half cage, it's exactly the same as the half cage option, or use the full cage if you need it. Just means I can keep a hand on the grip there, and it just means I can keep it as light as possible. I've got the SSD drive of course, and that allows me over 2 hours of RAW format recording, which is a joy to use and a joy to work with, especially when you're using it in Resolve. I've got quite a powerful PC, and even Premiere would sometimes drop the odd frame as I'm scrubbing through for 4K footage. With Resolve, the way it uses your system is so much better, and the Blackmagic RAW, honestly, it is a great format to record in. The only other things of note on this rig is obviously the top handle. I've mounted it backwards because of the way I use my lenses. A lot of the weight seems to be towards the front, especially with the Sigma 18-35. So once it's on there, you find a lot more weight at the front, and if you mount the handle the other way around, you end up pulling it forward and it's too front heavy. This just means you've got different options of where to hold the actual handle, just to spread the weight, a bit easier to carry. I've also gone for the Cine monitor, which I've had kicking around from when I was using it on the GH5 at some points, and even on the A7 III, which is what this is being recorded on now. And this is a great little monitor. It's brighter than what you find the actual screen is on the Blackmagic. That's the only real downside to this lovely screen on the Blackmagic, that when you're out in bright sunlight it's very dark, or it's just a bit too dark to see. Using this you do get a little bit more visibility in bright light, and that's always a bonus. The other thing on this rig was the little monitor grip, the monitor holder, which I did a little review on recently, and that is a lovely little sort of swivel attachment. Just means you can move the monitor around, you can review it, someone else can pull focus if needed, you can tilt it up and down. You do get a swivel arm with this monitor, but it's just not quite as good. There's a little bit more flexibility with this mount. And then I've also gone for a large battery pack, which is about 10,000 milliamps and will power this camera for a good 2 hours. With no issues whatsoever, maybe even 2.5 hours, close to 3 hours at points. And I'm running that straight into the Waipu connector on the side there, straight into the DC in connector on the side there, and that runs off the battery, and obviously the battery also powers the monitor. So it's a nice little setup to have where you don't have to worry too much about your powering. It will still have a battery in there as well, and should that die on you, it will then flick over from AC input straight over to the battery, and the battery, you're only getting about half hour with the battery, but should for some reason that fell on you or anything else, you've got that backup battery in there and it will just seamlessly carry on. As I say, you'll only get about 2 hours of recording, just over 2 hours on the SSD anyway, and I'm not really going to be using this for any long form recording. It's not going to be my wedding camera, so I don't need to worry too much about anything like that. So the other good thing with this is I can quickly whip this off, and when I mount the camera on the gimbal, the monitor and battery can come and attach to the side of the gimbal handle. It just means then I can evenly distribute the weight to make sure it's stabilized properly, and if I need to take the handle off, it's quick release, so I can just whiz that off and away I go. I don't like messing around too much, especially when I'm changing my setup. I want to get moving quite quickly, and it's great that I can just get up and running, change any of it quite quickly, and away I go. I've also got the small rig Arca-Swiss mounting plate, which is actually designed to be fitted straight onto the Crane 3 Lab or the Weeble Lab gimbals. But you've also got little extra mounts on the bottom for any counterweights. But once I get the Crane 3 Lab, I will feed back to you as how well it balances. I've seen others use it fully rigged up with monitors on top, and it seems to operate really well. So I want to keep it reasonably light. The heaviest lens I'm going to use is most definitely the Sigma 18-35. So it should operate quite nicely. So lenses. These are the lenses that I've decided to go for. And as I say, apart from the Sigma 18-35, all of these lenses didn't cost me any more than £120 or about $150. In fact, I can run through the lenses now and let you know exactly what I paid for each one. Now, all of them I've chosen to mount via EF mount to the Viltrox Speedbooster. Again, I wanted to keep the cost down. The Metabone Speedbooster is arguably the better option, but at £120 just for the Speedbooster, it made a lot of sense for me to try that first, especially when I'm finding out what lenses I like, and to decide on if I'm going to stick with it or if I indeed upgrade to the Metabone Speedbooster at a later date. With that in mind, every lens I've picked up is the Canon EF mount lens, and obviously you can get the benefits then with the Speedbooster. Now, a little bit of maths for you. The sensor is just under a 1.9 times crop when compared to a 35mm full frame. When you use the Viltrox Speedbooster, it's a 0.71 times crop. I've done a little playing around with the maths, and it essentially comes out at pretty much dead on a 1.35 crop. It's not exact, but it's close enough to then give you an idea of how big the focal length will be on these lenses when used in conjunction with this Speedbooster and the Blackmagic. So first up, we have the Sigma 10-20mm. It's the f3.5 version. I actually owned the 10-20mm, I think it's f4 to f6 version, the Mark 1 of this lens, if you will, many years ago when I first got into digital photography. And I used that on the Canon 550 or the Rebel X5 or the T2i in America, and that was what actually got me into photography, was those budget Canon SLRs. Being a crop sensor lens, it was good to get a crop sensor wide angle. The 10-20mm was a lovely lens, and I actually enjoyed using that quite a lot. It wasn't the best lens by any means, but it got me some great results from it. With that in mind, this is designed for a crop of about a 1.5 or 1.6, I think it was, on the original Canon crop sensors. So it's giving you an equivalent of a 15 to 30mm, which is quite a nice focal length. This is going to be my super wide as long as it performs well enough. I've had a little play with it, and there is some very slight vignetting at 10mm. If you were looking at using the maths I said earlier, it would essentially comes out at a 13.5mm to a 27mm lens. At the 20 or 27mm, once you've fully zoomed in, there's no issues at all. But at the widest angle, at 10mm or the equivalent of 13.5mm, there's a little bit of vignetting in the corners, and it's pretty noticeable. So once you zoom into about 12, you don't see any real issues at all, and that's still under a 16mm equivalent. So that's great, and that's just something when I need something super wide, that's the one I'm going to be grabbing. And not forgetting, with this Speedbooster, you obviously can drop 2 stops of light on there as well. So from a 3.5 goes down to about a 2.5, which is quite nice. So the lens that everyone's saying to get, and to be honest, this was actually the first lens I ordered. I had this lens before I had the Blackmagic, because stock is still so limited on these cameras. And it's been sat there waiting for a couple of months before I could even have a camera to put it on. This is a lovely lens. The image is sharp, is exactly what you would hope. It's something that everyone raves about. It's extremely well built. but it's not cheap. It's well over £500, over $600-700 in the US, and it's not something that you can just grab and chuck on there. But the images you get from it are wonderful. It's why I went for it. It's what I knew I'd use most of the time. Being that it's a 1.8, it actually drops down to a 1.2 with the speed booster, which is probably going to be a little too soft anyway in certain places, but it's nice to have the option if needed. And with that speed booster, I've worked it out to be 24mm to about 47-48mm zoom equivalency, which is lovely. It really is the sort of thing you'd want on a gimbal for most of your shots, I'd imagine. So moving up the focal length, I picked up a vintage Pentax or Super Takumar 1.4 50mm lens. This has a lot of character. This is something that a lot of people have been saying. Get one of these, they're very cheap, and again under £100 or under $100 even in the US. It's something that I was thinking it's a bit of a no-brainer. I'll chuck it in the bag, see how I get on with it. This is an M42 mount, or M42 mount, and then I put a very simple cheap Canon EF mount on there so that I could use it straight on the speed booster. At 1.4 it actually drops down to a 0.95, which again might be a little bit too extreme, but the option's there. This one is a very nice option. There's a little bit of marks on the bodywork, but it's generally very clean. It's something that is very impressive for the age of the lens, and something that I'm really keen to get out and try and find where it's best used, where its character lies really. This sits in at around a 67mm focal length, and it'd be great for sort of talking heads, anything that's not really more than one person. So out of these 5, that Sigma was brand new, and this one was also brand new, and this was also one of the first ones I ordered, just because this one was so cheap. This came in at around £185, which is ridiculously cheap. This is actually one of the Samyang's cinema grade lenses, or their budget cinema grade lenses. You've got a declicked aperture on there, which is lovely to use. It is their 85mm T1.5, so it's the equivalent of an 85 1.4. Again, you can drop this down with the EF mount to a 0.95, which is again probably a little bit too much, but it's an option. And at 85mm, I think I worked this out to about 116mm focal length. So a bit more of a zoom, a bit of a funny focal length really, not one that's familiar. There's the option of an 85, 105, 135 that I've used in the past. Not had anything in between that. I'm not 100% how much I'm going to use it, but for the price, you're getting arguably the best of Samyang's cheap or budget cinema lenses, and this really is the cheapest of the lot. And finally, something that I picked up on a bit of a whim at the photography show a few months back here in Birmingham at the NEC. So this is another prime lens, and it's a Zeiss 135 3.5. I actually bought this from the Disabled Photographer Society stand there, which is a wonderful charity, and they have a lot of classic lenses. Lots of them just dumped on the table, but there were a few in glass cabinets. I didn't pay much more than £30 for this lens, and the image you can get out of this is remarkably good. I actually used this for speeches on the A7 III as a test from the back of the room, and at 135 I even used it for a ceremony, and the image was lovely, which made me think I'll keep hold of this. Again, it's an M42 mount, and I put the same cheap adapter on there, Canon EF mount adapter. And it brings it down to another 2.5, and with the crop about 170mm lens, which will be my zoom. It will be something that if I want to just get some nice sort of B-roll shots of any of the surrounding environment, just things I want to put into the film that I'm shooting, and maybe an odd shot. You could do some sort of nice dialogue shot from a distance, just to change up the way your film and footage is looking. Is something for the price I just had to chuck in the bag and see how it gets on. So that's the Blackmagic, that's my lenses. These are the ones I'm going to see how I get on with. I know I'm going to enjoy the Sigma 18-35, but it was the other lenses that I really wanted to see how much of them I would use. For the price, they're just going to stay in the kit bag. I don't see me getting rid of them until I get a better replacement if I needed it for any professional work. I hope how I've rigged it has been of interest to you. I've tried to keep it simple, ready to go. I didn't want to put a V-mount battery. I didn't want a full rig. That is a good way of doing it. And I noticed another YouTuber mentioned the other day, they didn't know where they got the quote from, but cinema cameras is Lego for adults, and I'm kind of starting to agree with that, although it can get very expensive, so we've got to be careful there. Do keep an eye out for the next video over the next couple of days. If this has been of interest, I will be doing a little sample film where I've gone out and tested all of these side by side in the same environment, something that you'll be able to see exactly how they perform, what they look like, the characteristics. I can show you the vignette you'll get on the super wide angle. This really was something that you struggle, I think, to find a good wide angle for the Blackmagic or any of the crop sensor, the sort of smaller mirrorless micro four thirds crop sensors, I should say. It's hard to find a good budget option for that super wide, so I really have got a nice option of focal lengths starting from a sort of 15-16mm all the way up to 175mm. It's nice to have the options, to be able to sit there and think, what lens am I going to use? I've got the options and I can tell the story how I want to tell it without having to break the bank, and that's what this video is about really. You could probably do away with that and still have some good lenses that will give you the options you need. With the GH5, I've still got a few different lenses for that, but they're native mount. They are, the main one that I use is the 12-35 2.8. Which is great, but it's a dual stabilized lens as well, which would help because the sensor isn't stabilized on the actual Blackmagic. But I did want something a little bit more creative, but also something that just gave me a different option, something different that I could use. So keep an eye out for the vintage lens options. I'd love you to drop us a comment below and let us know exactly what vintage or budget lenses that you guys are using, because there's still a few out there that still crop up that I've never heard of that seem to be working well for a lot of people. So keep me informed, keep everyone else informed, keep your eye on our next videos coming out so you can find out more about how these lenses perform. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the bell notifications to be kept informed of those new videos. And until then, I will see you in the next one.